The night my mother took my hand and whispered, "After tomorrow, everything will change." I didn't understand that she wasn't giving me a warning. She was giving me her last piece of truth, a truth she had kept locked behind her tired eyes for more years than I could comprehend. The hallway was dim, lit only by that one flickering bulb that had been dying for months, but somehow refused to go out, almost like it sensed this was a moment it needed to illuminate. I remember how the light danced over her face, revealing lines I had never truly noticed. Lines carved not just by age, but by nights she must have spent awake, staring into darkness only she feared. When she grabbed my wrist, her hand was so cold it startled me, but it was the strength in her grip, firm, desperate, shaking, that made something inside me tighten with unease. She had never held me like that before. Not even during the worst fights. Not even during the years when everything around us seemed to be falling apart. Her voice cracked as she spoke, each syllable trembling, as if the words themselves were too heavy to say aloud. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you must not trust anyone who comes here. Anyone who asks for me." I wanted to dismiss it, to convince myself that she was being dramatic, that maybe she had watched one too many crime documentaries, that maybe loneliness and stress were twisting her thoughts again. But when she looked at me, really looked at me, it felt like she was handing me a secret she had been protecting with her life. Her eyes, once fierce and stubborn, now glistened with fear so raw it made my stomach drop. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, to ask who she was afraid of, but she let go of my wrist, turned away, and walked toward her room as if the weight of her confession had drained the last of her strength. Her steps were slow, uneven, each one echoing down the hall with a finality I didn't understand until later. The house, usually warm and familiar, suddenly felt hollow, like its walls had been silently absorbing her fears for years, and were now exhaling them into the air around me. I stood frozen long after she shut her door, staring at the fading light seeping through the crack beneath it, wondering why her shadow seemed smaller than it used to be. Something about that night dug into me, the way memories do when they're trying to warn you. I could feel the heaviness in the air, the hard-to-explain pressure that makes your heart beat louder in your ears. I replayed her words over and over, trying to make sense of them, hearing things I never paid attention to before, like the way she always double-checked the locks, how she avoided certain calls, how she tensed whenever the doorbell rang. There were pieces of her life I had never questioned, pieces she had tucked away behind gentle smiles and tired jokes, and I had been too wrapped in my own world to push further. I told myself I would ask her again in the morning, that maybe she would explain with more clarity, maybe she would finally trust me with the truth. But I didn't know then that the morning she was preparing me for would unravel everything I thought I knew about her. I didn't know the kind of people who were connected to her past, the kind of danger she had walked away from, the kind that doesn't forget or forgive. And I didn't know that her warning wasn't about tomorrow changing. It was about tomorrow destroying the version of life we had both been pretending was safe. If I had known, I would have held her hand tighter. I would have asked the questions she hoped I never needed to ask. I would have stayed by her door all night. But I didn't. And because I didn't, the next morning wasn't just different. It was the beginning of a truth that would tear open everything I believed about my mother, about our home, and about the shadows she had been fighting long before I ever realized we weren't alone. The next morning began with a silence so unnatural that it made my skin crawl, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to happen. I woke up earlier than usual, my mother's trembling voice still echoing in my head, her warning looping through my thoughts with an urgency I couldn't shake off. The sun had barely risen, casting long, pale beams through the curtains, beams that usually felt warm and comforting but now looked ghostly and cold. I walked into the hallway, expecting to hear the familiar sounds of my mother making tea or moving around the kitchen, but there was nothing. The quiet was so deep it felt like stepping into a vacuum. When I reached her room and knocked gently, there was no response. I pushed the door open and found her bed perfectly made, as if she had never slept in it. The window was slightly open, letting in a draft that made the curtains sway like they were signaling danger in a language I couldn't understand. Her shoes were gone, her coat missing, and the faint smell of her perfume lingered in the air, fading the way she had faded from the house. My chest tightened with a panic I tried to swallow. I kept telling myself she must have gone for a morning walk, but that didn't make sense. She had been too anxious the night before, too afraid to even stand alone in the hallway. I searched the house, calling her name louder each time, but all I found was a slip of paper on the dining table with her handwriting on it, shaky and uneven. "Don't open the door for anyone." My hands trembled as I held it, the same fear she carried now seeping into my bones. I checked outside from the window, scanning the street for any sign of her, but the neighborhood looked painfully normal. Kids waiting for the school bus, a neighbor watering her plants, cars warming up for the morning commute. The ordinary world felt insulting, almost mocking, because something extraordinary and terrifying was happening to us. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but her warning stopped me cold. Who could I trust if she couldn't even trust the people who might come looking for her? I paced the living room in circles, my mind racing through every strange moment, every uneasy glance, every tense silence she had ever shown in the last few months. And then, just as I leaned down to pick up the teacup she had left on the table the night before, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a normal ring, it was a long, deliberate press, slow and heavy, like someone testing whether I was brave enough or foolish enough to open the door. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I froze. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The doorbell rang again, this time shorter but sharper, the kind of ring that said, "We know you're in there." I tiptoed toward the peephole, my hands shaking uncontrollably, expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe someone harmless. But when I finally looked, my blood went cold. A man in a long dark coat stood there, tall, rigid, with a blank expression that felt more threatening than anger. His hands were clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the door with an unnerving stillness that made me step back instinctively. He didn't knock. He didn't move. He just waited. My mother's words hit me like a punch. "Don't trust anyone who comes asking for me." And then he spoke, his voice deep, calm, too calm. "We need to speak with your mother. It's urgent." Every muscle in my body tensed. He said we, which meant he wasn't alone. I peeked again and saw a second figure standing near the porch, half hidden by the morning shadows, watching the windows like he expected someone to run. My breath hitched as panic gripped my chest. Why were they here? Who were they? And why did my mother know they were coming? My mind screamed at me to stay silent, to stay still, but the man at the door leaned closer, his voice dropping in a cold whisper. "We know she's inside." In that moment, I realized my mother hadn't been paranoid. She had been preparing me. She knew this day would come. And now I was alone in a house that no longer felt like home, with strangers outside who carried the certainty of people who always get what they came for. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could, every instinct inside me screaming that the man wasn't simply asking. He was hunting. My pulse hammered in my throat as I crept backward until my legs brushed against the edge of the dining chair. The air felt heavier with each second they remained outside, like the walls themselves were absorbing the pressure of their presence. I didn't dare move a curtain or make a sound, terrified that even the slightest shift would give me away. The man at the door waited with an unnatural stillness, and for a moment I thought maybe he would leave, but then I heard footsteps on the gravel, slow and deliberate, circling the house. My breath caught as I realized the second figure was checking the perimeter, looking for signs of movement, peeking into windows like he already expected to find someone hiding inside. I crouched down, pressing myself against the wall, trying to quiet my breathing as a shadow passed across the living room window. Their movements were too calculated, too familiar with searching. These weren't neighbors, they weren't officials, and they definitely weren't harmless. Suddenly the man at the door knocked, not loudly, but with a firm rhythm that sent chills down my spine. 3 slow knocks, paused, then 2 quick ones. Like a coded message taught long before they ever arrived here. "We know she's here," he repeated, his voice steady, almost bored, as if this was routine for him. "And we're not leaving." His calmness frightened me more than anger ever could. People who yell can be reasoned with. People who stay silent, patient, and emotionless, they're the dangerous ones. I swallowed hard as a memory flashed in my mind. My mother pausing whenever she heard footsteps outside, the way she always kept the curtains slightly drawn, the way she avoided answering unknown calls. The warning signs had been there all along. I just hadn't understood them. The man's shadow moved again, and I heard him mutter something to the other figure, too quiet to catch. Then came the sound of metal, keys, tools, something jingling softly. My stomach dropped. They weren't leaving. They were preparing to get inside. I crawled toward the kitchen, my breaths coming faster despite my desperate attempts to stay quiet. My mother's note replayed in my mind. Don't open the door for anyone. She must have known these people. She must have known exactly what they were capable of. I reached the back of the kitchen and stood up slowly, gripping the counter for balance. My mind raced through possibilities. Should I call the police? Should I run? But what if the police were connected to them? What if running drew attention? What if they were here because of something my mother did to protect us? Before I could decide, I heard footsteps at the side door, the one connected to the laundry room. A different voice, deeper and rougher, spoke. Check the back. If she's inside, she's not alone. My heart stopped. They knew about me. They weren't just here for her. They were here for anyone close to her. Anyone who might know her secrets. Fear washed over me so fast that for a moment I felt dizzy. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy iron skillet, holding it tightly even though my hands were trembling. It was ridiculous to think it could protect me, but it was the only thing between me and whatever waited outside. The side door rattled. Someone tested the handle. My legs nearly gave out. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps moving along the backyard, slow, scanning, searching. The seconds stretched on like hours, my ears straining for every sound. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps grew distant. But the dread didn't leave. Their silence meant they were planning something. They weren't gone. They had simply changed tactics. I sank to the floor, pressing my back against the cabinet, clutching the skillet like a lifeline. My mind was spiraling, trying to understand why these people were so determined to find my mother. What had she been hiding all this time? Who were they? And the most terrifying question of all, if they found her, what would happen to me? The house felt like a trap now. Every window a vulnerability, every shadow a threat. My mother wasn't here to explain. She wasn't here to protect me. And whatever she feared was already at our door, searching, circling, waiting for the moment I made one wrong move. I stayed on the kitchen floor for several minutes, clutching the skillet like it was a shield, waiting for my heartbeat to slow down enough so I could think clearly again. But the longer I sat there, the more the silence outside seemed to twist into something unnatural. Too quiet, too controlled, as if the men had simply melted into the shadows around the house, watching, waiting for me to make even the smallest mistake. My mind raced from one terrifying thought to another, and with every passing second, the weight of my mother's disappearance, her trembling warning, and the men's determination fused into a single chilling realization. Whatever my mother had run from had finally found its way back to our doorstep. I forced myself to stand, every movement slow and trembling, and reached for my phone with shaking fingers. I pulled up the messages I had sent her earlier. Mom, where are you? Call me. Please answer your phone. All still unread. I dialed her number again, pressing the phone tightly to my ear, hoping against hope to hear her voice. But it rang twice, then immediately went to voicemail, as though someone had pressed decline. My stomach twisted. I had to do something. Sitting here, hiding, wasn't going to bring her back. I needed answers. Anything that could tell me who those men were, and why they were after her. I went to her bedroom, the fear settling into my bones as I pushed the door open once more. The room felt colder than before, like the warmth had been sucked out with her absence. I opened her closet, rifling through her neatly arranged dresses, scarves, and boxes she kept on the top shelf. For years, she had guarded her belongings, always shutting her door while cleaning, always locking drawers. I thought she was just private. Now I realized she was paranoid, protective, hiding something she didn't want anyone to see. I reached for a small wooden box tucked behind her winter sweaters, the kind of box that looked far older than anything else she owned. My hands trembled as I opened it, half expecting something mundane inside. But the moment the lid lifted, my breath caught. Inside were old photographs, some burned at the edges, some torn straight down the middle, as if she had tried to destroy pieces of her past but couldn't bring herself to finish the job. One photo showed her much younger, maybe in her 20s, standing beside a man whose face had been scratched out violently with ink. In another, she was holding me as a baby, smiling nervously, while two unfamiliar men stood behind us. Men who had unsettlingly similar silhouettes to the ones outside right now. My blood turned cold. I reached deeper into the box and found documents. Papers covered in stamps and signatures, some in languages I didn't understand. There were legal letters addressed to her under a completely different name. Names I had never heard her use. My hands shook harder. Who had she been before she became my mother? Why had she changed her identity? And what did these men want from her now? Just as I lifted another folded paper, a car engine rumbled outside. Slow, steady, stopping directly in front of our house. My heart slammed against my ribs as I rushed to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. A black SUV sat there, tinted windows, engine humming. Not the same car the men had used earlier. This one felt even more ominous, like the final piece of a nightmare assembling itself. The passenger door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wore a long black coat, her hair tied back in a tight bun. She looked professional. Too professional. She wasn't a neighbor. She wasn't a friend. She wasn't harmless. She walked toward the house with the confidence of someone who didn't need to knock more than once to get what she wanted. I backed away from the window, my breath shaking, the box still open on the bed. Another knock echoed through the house, this time sharp, forceful, and not patient at all. "We need to speak with her daughter," the woman's voice called out, sophisticated but cold. My heart nearly stopped. They knew about me. They knew I was inside. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in, every exit shrinking, every window becoming a target. I pressed my back against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by pieces of a past I knew nothing about. The knocking grew louder, more demanding. Then her voice again, calm yet sharp enough to cut through my panic. "We know you're alone. Open the door. This is your last chance." My breath hitched, my chest tightening until it hurt. My mother's warning echoed louder than the pounding at the door. "Don't trust anyone, no matter what they say." And for the first time, I understood something terrifyingly clear. These people weren't here to talk. They were here to take something or someone back. And I was next. The pounding on the door didn't stop. It grew harder, faster, more impatient, echoing through the house like a warning drumbeat. My entire body shook as I pressed myself lower against the wall, clutching the edge of the bed with trembling fingers, trying to quiet the sound of my own breathing. The woman outside didn't sound like someone who was used to being ignored. She sounded like someone who was used to obedience. "Open the door. Now." Her voice was icy, controlled, as if she already knew what the outcome would be. But she wanted to give me the illusion of choice. I stared at the open box beside me, the torn photographs, the scratched-out faces, the documents with names that weren't my mother's. Everything felt unreal, as if the world had cracked open and I had fallen through into someone else's nightmare. My own mother had lived an entire secret life before me, one filled with people who were now back at our door, demanding something they believed belonged to them. My hand brushed against another piece of paper hidden in the corner of the box, a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my mother's handwriting. My heart raced as I tore it open, praying for answers, praying for anything that could help me understand this terrifying chaos. Inside was a short letter, written hurriedly, the ink smudged in places like she had been shaking while writing it. "If you find this, I didn't have time. They found me. Do not trust anyone, no matter what name they use, no matter what story they tell. Run if you can. Hide if you must. I'm sorry." Tears blurred my vision as I read it again and again, trying to process the meaning behind those last, desperate words. She knew they were coming. She knew they would come for me next. She didn't tell me who they were, maybe to protect me, maybe because saying it aloud made it too real. I didn't have time to think more, because the next sound made my blood freeze. Metal scraping against metal. They weren't knocking anymore, they were picking the lock. A sharp click echoed through the hallway, followed by a low murmur from the woman. "Hurry up. She's inside." Panic surged through me like electricity. I stumbled to my feet, my heart pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears. My mother's warning blared in my head like a siren. "Run if you can. Hide if you must." I grabbed the box, clutching it against my chest as I rushed to the closet, thinking maybe I could hide there until they left. But that hope died the moment I heard the deadbolt slide open. The front door creaked, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps entering the house. They didn't call out again. They didn't need to. They were confident, too confident, that I was trapped. The woman's heels clicked on the hardwood floor, each step measured, echoing predatory. "She's upstairs," she said calmly, as if she had lived in this house her whole life and knew every corner, every room, every hiding place. The man with her replied in a low voice I couldn't fully hear, but the sound of his boots against the floorboards told me everything. He was larger, heavier, and moving with cold purpose. I backed into the closet, shutting the door as quietly as possible, heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was terrified they would hear it. I crouched behind the hanging coats, gripping the box like a lifeline, trying not to sob, trying to stay silent as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The house creaked softly under their weight, and every sound, every slow step felt like a countdown. "She couldn't have gone far," the woman said in that same chillingly calm voice, opening doors, scanning rooms with the casualness of someone looking for misplaced keys rather than a terrified person hiding for their life. The man checked the bathroom, the guest room, the hallway closet. My breath hitched painfully when I heard him pause outside my mother's bedroom. His voice was low, annoyed. "She found the box." My entire body went numb. The woman entered the room next, her heels stopping right in front of the bed where the box had been. A tense silence followed, long, suffocating, until she spoke with a slow, cold satisfaction. "Then she knows." I bit down on my hand to keep from making a sound, tears streaming silently down my cheeks. They knew I had seen the evidence. They knew I knew something. Maybe more than I even realized. And that made me more dangerous to them. More urgent to capture. The woman walked back into the hallway. "Check every room," she ordered. "She's here. She has to be." The man's footsteps approached my room. The floorboards groaned under his weight, each step closer, closer, closer. My chest burned from holding my breath. My body curled tighter behind the coats. The doorknob to my room turned slowly. The door creaked open. His boots stopped just inches from the closet. He stood there listening, waiting. I clamped a hand over my mouth, praying to whatever power existed that he wouldn't hear the sound of my trembling. Then, with agonizing slowness, the closet door began to move. The closet door creaked open so slowly that the sound felt magnified, each inch a scream in the silence, every breath inside my chest turning razor-sharp. I shrank deeper into the coats, my fingers digging into the wooden box as if holding it tighter could somehow make me invisible. The man's shadow stretched across the floor before I even saw his face, long and heavy and unmistakably threatening. His breathing was steady, almost too calm for someone searching a house. They weren't frantic, they weren't desperate. They were confident hunters who believed the prey had already been cornered. The closet door stopped halfway, and I could hear his boots shift slightly as he leaned in. The faint rustle of fabric brushing against his coat. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that the darkness inside the closet would shield me from his gaze. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, the trembling whisper from the night before. "After tomorrow, everything will change." I finally understood she meant it literally. Everything was changing. Everything was falling apart. The man exhaled a slow, heavy breath that brushed against the coats near my face, so close I could smell the faint trace of cologne and something metallic beneath it. Gun oil, maybe. My heart thrashed against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I fought the urge to gasp. Fought the urge to move. Fought the urge to break. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening, waiting, sensing the air for even a hint of movement. Then the woman's voice called out from the hallway, sharp and impatient. "She's not in there. Check the attic." Her tone carried the irritation of someone whose time was being wasted. The man hesitated, as if still uncertain, and for one terrifying second I thought he would push the door wide open and expose me completely. But then he stepped back, the closet door sliding shut, leaving me submerged in darkness once more. I didn't dare breathe, not yet. I stayed frozen as his heavy footsteps retreated, each one agonizingly slow. When he finally walked down the hall, the floorboards groaning faintly under his weight, I felt an involuntary sob tremble up my throat, but I clamped my hand over my mouth, forcing it down. They weren't gone, not yet. The woman's heels clicked against the floor as she moved to the ladder leading to the attic. She must be hiding up there. Her mother hid there once too. The casual way she said it made my blood run cold. They knew my mother's hiding places. They knew her patterns. They had tracked her before. This wasn't their first hunt. The man grunted in agreement as he pulled down the attic ladder, the wooden steps groaning. The sound echoed through the house, and in that moment, I realized their attention had shifted upward. For a brief, fragile moment, the hallway was mine. My escape window. My only chance. I slid out from behind the coats, moving on shaking legs, my body weak with fear. The box pressed tightly against my chest felt heavier now. Not just with documents but with the crushing weight of truth. I crept toward the bedroom door, leaning just enough to peek into the hall. Both of them had their backs turned. The woman already climbing the ladder while the man steadied it from below. I knew I had seconds, maybe less. I stepped silently into the hallway, the floor chilling under my bare feet, and moved toward the stairs, praying none of the boards groaned. Halfway down, I heard the woman's voice from the attic entrance. She's not here either. She's smarter than her mother was. Those words nearly made me slip on the next step. Smarter than her mother was? What happened to my mother when they found her last time? What had she survived that she never told me? I reached the bottom of the stairs, adrenaline fueling my trembling legs, and headed toward the back door. Every shadow felt alive. Every silence felt like a threat. I unlocked the door as quietly as possible, but the mechanism clicked louder than I wanted. I winced, glancing over my shoulder, but no footsteps approached. They were still upstairs, still preoccupied. I pushed the door open, letting the cold air rush against my face, snapping my senses awake. For one moment, I felt a sliver of hope, small but enough to move forward. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, and began to run. Not toward the street, they'd expect that. Not toward the woods, they might have people there. Instead, I darted toward the narrow walkway between the house and the neighbor's fence, pulling myself into the cramped space. The gravel crunched softly beneath my feet, each sound making me flinch. I clutched the box tighter, whispering to myself, "Keep moving, keep moving." I made it halfway down the side of the house when the front door slammed open. The woman's voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. "She's outside. Find her." Panic surged through me like fire. They knew. They knew I had escaped. Heavy footsteps exploded across the porch, men scattering in different directions. The hunt had started again, and this time, I wasn't just hiding. I was running for my life. I ran blindly, my breath tearing through my chest, the cold morning air stabbing at my lungs as I squeezed through the narrow gap between the fence and the house, the wooden panels scraping against my arms. Every sound around me felt amplified. The crunch of gravel, the rustle of branches above, the distant echo of cars passing on the main road. Yet underneath it all was the terrifying rhythm of boots pounding the pavement behind me. They weren't guessing anymore. They were following. Hunting. The woman's voice carried through the neighborhood with lethal precision. She couldn't have gone far. Split up. I froze for a split second, pressing myself against the fence, trying to make myself small, invisible, but my heartbeat was so loud I swore they would hear it from across the yard. I crept forward, inch by inch, clutching the box against my chest as though it held the only answers that could save me. The neighbor's backyard gate was slightly ajar, a stroke of luck I didn't dare question. I slipped through, quietly shutting it behind me, then crawled along the side of their shed, praying the wooden structure would hide my silhouette. My body trembled uncontrollably, adrenaline mixing with fear until my limbs felt weak and heavy. I could hear one of the men on the other side of the fence, his voice low and irritated. "She's on foot. She won't make it far." His partner answered with a chilling certainty, "She doesn't need to. We just need her out long enough to search the house." My blood ran cold. They weren't trying to capture me immediately. They were buying time. They needed something inside my house. Something they thought I knew. Or something they thought my mother left behind. My grip tightened on the box. They wanted this. Everything inside it. Whatever dark truth my mother had been hiding for years was inside these torn photos and fractured documents. And they would tear apart my entire life to reclaim it. A sudden crash echoed from my backyard. The sound of something being knocked over. They were searching violently now, no longer pretending to be calm professionals. The hunt was unraveling into desperation. I crouched lower, trying to steady my breathing, but tears burned my eyes. I felt like a child hiding from monsters under the bed. Except these monsters were real, organized, and dangerously patient. My brain screamed for a plan. I needed to run farther. Get somewhere public, somewhere they couldn't drag me away unnoticed. But the moment I stepped out, they might see me. The neighborhood was too open, too exposed. Then I heard the distinctive hum of an engine approaching from the far side of the street. A car. A big one. The kind with tinted windows and a low growl that didn't belong in a quiet neighborhood. My stomach twisted. More of them. Reinforcements. I peeked around the shed and saw the SUV roll to a stop near my house. Another man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. He spoke to the woman with him, his voice low but firm, as if he was the one in charge. Whatever this was, whatever group they belonged to, it was bigger than I imagined. This wasn't a simple family conflict or a debt collector or old friend. This was something organized. Something dangerous. Something my mother had run from with everything she had. I swallowed hard and wiped my trembling hands on my jeans, forcing myself to stay focused. I had to move. Staying here meant being cornered. I slipped along the fence until I reached a bush near the neighbor's back porch. Using it as cover, I peeked toward the street again. Most of them were near my house. Only one man stood on the opposite side, scanning lazily as if convinced I hadn't reached this far. It was my chance. I dropped to my stomach, crawling under the bush, ignoring the twigs scraping my skin and the cold mud soaking into my clothes. Once I reached the edge of the yard, I sprinted, quiet but fast, toward the alley behind the houses. My heart threatened to burst from my chest, each step too loud, too risky, but I kept moving. When I reached the alley, I pressed myself against the side of a dumpster, gasping for breath. My legs shook violently beneath me, and for a brief second, I thought I might collapse. But then I heard voices again, closer, sharper, angrier. They were spreading out, closing the grid around the neighborhood. She's somewhere here. She can't disappear, the lead man barked, his voice echoing with authority and tension. Yes, I thought. I couldn't disappear. Not yet. Not without learning the truth. Not without finding my mother. I forced myself up, gripping the box with numb fingers, and pushed deeper into the alley, where shadows swallowed my figure, and the world felt eerily still. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know who I could trust. I only knew one thing with absolute clarity. I couldn't go home. Not until I uncovered the truth my mother had spent her entire life trying to hide. And the truth these people were willing to destroy everything to reclaim. I kept moving through the alley until the houses began to blur together. My vision stinging from cold air and fear. My legs aching with each desperate step. The early morning light was shifting, brightening the sky just enough to expose me if I wasn't careful. I needed a place, any place, where I could think without hearing footsteps behind me or shadows creeping toward my back. I spotted an old community park at the end of the block, abandoned at this hour except for the rusted swings gently swaying in the breeze. I slipped behind the slide, crouching low, clutching the box so tightly my fingers throbbed. My breath came out in ragged bursts, fogging the cold morning air. For a long moment, I just sat there, trembling, trying to gather the pieces of my shattered thoughts. Everything that had seemed safe, my home, my neighborhood, my past, had transformed into a maze of threats. Every creak, every distant voice, every car passing by felt like it belonged to them. I opened the box again, trying to make sense of the puzzle my mother left behind. Beneath the photos and documents, I discovered a folded map with markings. Circles around certain towns, arrows leading toward hidden paths. And one small X marked boldly on a remote area far from the city. My hands froze. Had she planned to go there? Was she hiding there right now? Or had she left it as a place where she wanted me to go if things went wrong? As I stared at the map, a memory flashed, faint, but vivid enough to make my chest tighten. Years ago, my mother had taken me on a road trip, just to clear our heads, she said. But everything she did back then felt different now. She kept checking her mirrors, slowing down near exits, switching routes as if trying to shake something off her trail. And near the end of that trip, she had pointed toward a cluster of mountains in the distance and said softly, "If anything ever happens to me, remember this place." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought she was being poetic, sentimental. Now I realized she was leaving breadcrumbs for me. Clues in case her past finally caught up. My heart pounded harder. I folded the map carefully and tucked it into the box, feeling a spark of determination rising through the fear. I needed to get there. It was the only place that might hold answers, or maybe even her. A sudden bark of a dog snapped me back to reality. The alley behind me echoed with movement, quick, sharp footsteps and the low murmur of men coordinating. My body stiffened. They were close. Too close. I flattened myself against the cold metal of the slide, holding my breath as shadows stretched along the ground. "Spread out." A voice commanded. "She's on foot. She'll try to leave the neighborhood." Their steps grew louder, heavier. My heart hammered in my ears. I crawled backward, inching through the damp grass until I reached the fence at the edge of the park. The wood was splintered in places, but it was climbable. I hoisted myself up, biting back a whimper as my scraped palms protested. When I reached the top, I paused just long enough to make sure no one was watching, then dropped silently into the neighboring yard. The impact sent a jolt up my spine, but I forced myself to keep moving. I slipped through another narrow passage, squeezing past trash bins, ducking beneath hanging laundry. Every yard felt like stolen ground. Every second felt like borrowed time. Finally, I reached the street beyond the neighborhood. A busy road where cars rushed by, oblivious to the nightmare happening just a few blocks away. This was it. My only chance. I stepped onto the sidewalk, merging with the morning crowd as though I belonged there, even though inside I was a trembling mess. I kept my head low, my hood up, my grip on the box firm. A city bus screeched to a stop nearby, the doors opening with a metallic hiss. Without thinking, I climbed aboard and sank into a seat near the back. The bus lurched forward, pulling me away from everything I had ever known. My home, my safety, my old life, and toward the unknown path my mother had prepared for me. As the city blurred past the window, I finally let out a breath I felt I had been holding since dawn. I didn't know where this road would lead. I didn't know what secrets were waiting at the marked X on the map. I didn't know if my mother was alive, hiding, running, or captured. All I knew was this. The truth was out there somewhere, buried beneath years of silence and fear. And now it was my turn to uncover it. Because whatever happened after tomorrow, just as my mother warned, had already begun, and there was no going back.